we're diving into a proposed prisoner exchange during a war between, the Nephites and the Lamanites. Ammoron, the king of the Lamanites, reaches out to the Nephite leader Moroni with this idea.
Yeah. And it's a really interesting situation because both sides are exhausted from all the fighting and, supplies are running low.
Right.
Ammoron, he wants to use this exchange to get more provisions, but Moroni sees it as a chance to strengthen his army.
Yeah, it says that in Alma 54.2.
Yeah, Moroni wanted the provisions for the support of his own people, and he also desired his own people for the strengthening of his army.
But Moroni, he throws in this condition that makes things really complicated.
Yeah.
He demands a Lamanite family, a husband, a wife, and children, in exchange for just one Nephite prisoner.
What?
Yeah.
What could be his reasoning?
It makes you wonder, right?
Yeah, it's a move that really reveals a lot about Moroni's character.
Right.
He's not just thinking strategically here. Yeah. He's also operating on a moral level.
I see. And this really comes through in the letter that he writes to Ammoron.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In Alma 54:6-7, Moroni writes, "Behold, I would tell you somewhat concerning the justice of God and the sword of his almighty wrath, which doth hang over you, except you repent and withdraw your armies into your own lands, or the land of your possessions, which is the land of Nephi."
Wow.
"Yea, I would tell you these things if you were capable of hearkening unto them. Yea, I would tell you concerning that awful hell that awaits to receive such murderers as thou and thy brother have been, except ye repent and withdraw your murderous purposes and return with your armies to your own lands."
There's such intensity in his words, righteous anger when he talks about the justice of God and warns of the sword of his almighty wrath.
Yeah.
He even threatens to arm the Nephite women and children if his demands aren't met. Verse 12, he says, "Yea, even I will arm my women and my children, and I will come against you, and I will follow you, even into your own land, which is the land of our first inheritance. Yea, and it shall be blood for blood, yea, life for life, and I will give you battle, even until you are destroyed from off the face of the earth."
It sounds like Moroni is deeply devoted to protecting his people and their faith.
Absolutely.
I mean, his faith is clearly central to his actions here.
Yeah, he carries such a huge weight of responsibility for these people.
He does.
And Ammoron doesn't just ignore this.
Right.
He pushes back with a lot of passion, but from a completely different angle.
Oh, yeah.
He's angry and he rejects Moroni's faith.
That's right. He says in verse 17 that the Nephites did wrong their brethren insomuch that they did rob them of their right to the government when it rightly belonged unto them.
Right.
So he's trying to justify the war by claiming that the Nephites wronged them and stole their government.
I see.
He believes he is in the right, fighting to correct a past injustice.
And then there's that interesting part where Ammoron almost seems to make fun of the idea of God.
Oh, yeah.
Alma 54.21, he says, "And as concerning that God whom ye say we have rejected, behold, we know not such a being, neither do ye. But if it so be that there is such a being, we know not, but that he hath made us as well as you."
Yeah, that statement really highlights the huge gap between their worldviews.
Yeah.
Moroni sees everything through his faith and believes in divine justice. But Ammoron has a much more practical, maybe even cynical view of things.
And then there's the part where Ammoron talks about the Lamanites' ancestry.
Oh, right.
Alma 54.23, it says, "I am Ammoron and a descendant of Zoram, whom your fathers pressed and brought out of Jerusalem."
Yeah, that's a really important piece of history that adds another layer to the conflict.
Right.
It shows that their hatred goes way back, generations even.
Wow. So that's really interesting.
It is. It's fascinating how much this exchange reveals about these two leaders. Even though it doesn't work out, we see that they're both convinced they're in the right.
Right.
And they're both willing to fight to the death for what they believe in.
It almost seems tragic that their inability to see past their own viewpoints just leads to more suffering and bloodshed.
Exactly. And it makes you think, what if they had been able to find some common ground, to see each other, not as enemies, but as human beings?
It's a question that keeps coming up throughout history, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do we overcome these divisions, these seemingly impossible differences?
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, you have Ammoron, who believes that he's fighting to reclaim what was taken from his ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, you have Moroni, who sees himself as defending his people and his faith from attackers.
And this is where it gets really interesting because both leaders believe they're fighting for justice.
Right.
But they have very different ideas about what justice means.
It's like they're both fighting for justice, but they have completely different versions of it.
Yeah.
And neither one is willing to compromise or even consider that there might be another way.
That's a great point, and this brings up a really fundamental question.
Yeah.
What is justice, and who gets to decide what it is?
That's a question philosophers and theologians have been wrestling with for centuries.
Right.
And it's still just as relevant today as it was back then.
Absolutely, because when you really think about it, every conflict, every war, every argument ultimately comes down to people having different ideas about what justice is.
So how do we deal with these complicated situations?
Yeah.
How do we find a way towards peace and understanding when our ideas about justice clash so strongly?
Well, it's not easy,
Right.
but I think the first step is to recognize the humanity of those we disagree with.
Okay.
We have to acknowledge that they're also trying to do what they think is right.
That's a really powerful idea.
Yeah.
It means stepping outside of our own sense of righteousness and trying to see the world from the perspective of those we see as our enemies.
It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
But I think it's necessary if we want to break free from the cycle of conflict and violence that has been going on for so long.
It's amazing how this one event, this proposed prisoner exchange, can reveal so much about human nature,
It really is.
about the power of belief
Yeah.
and the destructive nature of conflict.
Yeah, it's like a miniature version of the struggles we see throughout history, isn't it?
Right.
This constant push and pull between wanting peace and being willing to use violence to get what we want.
And the role of faith is so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It can inspire these incredible acts of compassion,
Right.
but it can also fuel conflict.
Yeah. It's
a complicated thing.
And fascinating.
And it reminds us that even the most devout people are capable of both great good and great evil.
So as we think about this story from the Book of Mormon,
Yeah.
what lessons can we learn?
Well,
What wisdom can we take from these ancient struggles to help us navigate the challenges we face today?
I think one of the most important takeaways is the importance of understanding.
Understanding the history behind a conflict, the motivations of the people involved,
Right.
the different perspectives that shape our beliefs and actions.
It's about trying to empathize, even with those we might consider our enemies.
Exactly. When we dehumanize others, when we reduce them to stereotypes, we lose the ability to have meaningful conversations,
Right.
to find common ground, to build bridges of understanding.
And without that understanding, without that willingness to see the world through the eyes of others, conflict becomes unavoidable.
It does, and it becomes much harder to break free from the cycle of violence and revenge.
So what can we do?
Yeah.
As individuals, as a society, how can we cultivate understanding and promote peace?
I think it starts with education.
Okay.
Learning about different cultures, different religions, different ways of seeing the world,
Right.
reading books, listening to podcasts, having respectful conversations with people who hold different views than our own.
It's about being curious,
Yeah,
asking questions, and really
Yeah.
listening to the answers.
precisely. And it's about being willing to challenge our own assumptions, to question our own biases, to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
It's a lifelong journey, this pursuit of understanding.
It is.
But it's a journey worth taking for the sake of ourselves, our communities, and our world.
I completely agree.
Well, thank you for joining us for this discussion about the proposed prisoner exchange between Amaron and Moroni. We hope you'll join us next time for another look at the scriptures.